A billionaire sat next to a crying single mother on a 14-hour flight. Somewhere over the Atlantic 6 hours in, she leaned close to her son and whispered something. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for help. She didn't even know he was listening. It was a single sentence spoken to a frightened 5-year-old during turbulence. And it shattered something inside him that a $9.7 billion empire and 3 years of buried grief couldn't protect. In that moment, he canceled the biggest deal of his career and made a phone call he'd been avoiding for 3 years. 44-year-old Maxwell Grant sat in seat 2A of a Boeing 777 first-class cabin JFK to Narita. 14 hours, one stop, one meeting that would reshape the global tech landscape. His seat was hand-stitched Poltrona Frau leather, the kind that adjusts to your body temperature, the kind most people never touch in their entire lives. A glass of Dom Perignon, 2012, sat untouched on the armrest tray. Next to it, a Salvatore Ferragamo amenity kit he hadn't opened. He didn't need eye cream. He needed the next 16 hours to go exactly as planned. His laptop was open to slide 37 of a presentation his team had spent 11 months building. The Kuroda Systems acquisition. $2.3 billion. 1,200 employees. 3 core patents in natural language AI processing that would vault Grant Nexus Technologies into the top 3 enterprise AI companies on the planet. The Patek Philippe on his wrist caught the overhead light every time he typed. That watch cost more than most apartments in Brooklyn. He wore it like it was nothing, because to him it was. Maxwell Grant was worth $9.7 billion. He owned homes in Aspen, the Maldives, and a villa outside Florence he'd visited exactly once. His company employed 14,000 people across 6 countries. Bloomberg had profiled him twice. Fortune had him on their cover. He had everything a man could build with ambition, discipline, and a willingness to sacrifice whatever stood between him and the next deal. But Maxwell Grant could not sleep on airplanes. Not because of turbulence, not because of noise, not because of the $2.3 billion waiting for him in Tokyo. He couldn't sleep because every time he closed his eyes, he heard a phone ringing. The same phone, the same ringtone, the same number flashing across the screen. Vermont Medical Center. 3 years ago. March 14th. He was in a boardroom on the 47th floor of his Manhattan headquarters. Slide 34. Q3 revenue projections. 14 people around a mahogany table waiting for his decision on a restructuring plan worth $800 million. His phone vibrated against the table. He glanced down. Vermont Medical Center. He knew what it meant. His mother had been sick for 7 months. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The calls had been coming more frequently. Each one shorter. Each one heavier. He looked at the number. He looked up at the slide. His VP was mid-sentence walking through margins. 14 people waiting. $800 million on the line. Maxwell placed the phone face down on the table. Continue, he said. 1 word. 1 syllable. The most expensive word he'd ever spoken. 4 hours later, he walked into room 412 at Vermont Medical Center. The bed was empty, sheets folded. On the nightstand sat a half-finished cup of tea gone cold. A paperback book with the corner of page 147 folded down. She never finished it. And a single sheet of paper folded twice written in pencil because she no longer had the strength to press a pen. Eleanor Grant, former elementary school teacher. The woman who made potato soup every Sunday. The woman who called him my little thunder when he was small enough to fit in her lap. She died alone in that room while her son sat in a leather chair deciding how to allocate capital. The nurse told him she'd been asking for him. In those final hours, she kept saying his name, over and over. Maxwell. Is Maxwell coming? Where is my son? He never read the letter. He folded it, slid it into his wallet, and it had been there ever since. 3 years. Edges worn soft from sitting against his hip. He carried it everywhere. He opened it, never. His father's voice cut through the memory like a blade across glass. She waited for you, Maxwell. She kept asking where you were. And you chose money. Henry Grant, 71 years old. Retired carpenter in Vermont. Hands like oak bark. Voice like gravel, he said those words at the funeral standing beside the casket he'd chosen himself. Pine, simple, no gold handles, no silk lining, just wood and truth. Then he walked away, and he never spoke to his son again. 3 years, no calls, no letters, no holidays. Maxwell sent checks every month, generous ones, 5 figures. Henry returned every single one, unopened. The richest man in the family couldn't buy a cup of coffee with his own father. Maxwell stared at his laptop screen. Slide 37. The Kuroda deal. Focus. This is what mattered. This is what he could control. Numbers, strategy, outcomes. Not the past. Not the dead. Not the letter in his wallet he was too afraid to read. He could buy anything in the world. Literally anything. A private island, a Vermeer painting, a seat on a spacecraft. But the one thing he needed most, 5 more minutes with his mother, was the only thing his money couldn't touch, and he knew it. He just chose not to think about it, like he chose not to think about it every single day for 3 years. That was when she appeared. The curtain separating first class from the boarding corridor pulled back, and a woman stepped through with a boy attached to her hand like a lifeline. She carried a canvas backpack, faded blue, the kind sold at Target for $19. No Rimowa, no Tumi, no monogrammed luggage tag. Just a backpack stuffed so full the zipper strained at the top. The boy was maybe 5, small for his age, brown eyes too large for his face. He clutched a stuffed dinosaur green, missing one button eye fur, matted from years of love and washing, and being dragged across floors he probably wasn't supposed to drag it across. He held it against his chest like a soldier holds a shield. The flight attendant checked the woman's boarding pass, then checked it again. A small pause, a second glance. That particular look that says, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The woman noticed. She stood a little straighter, didn't say anything, just waited. Maxwell noticed too. The woman wore a gray hoodie, Target clearance tag still peeking from the inside collar, sneakers that had been white once, maybe 2 years ago. Her eyes were red and swollen. She'd been crying before she boarded. Not the kind of crying you do during a sad movie. The kind that comes from somewhere deeper. The kind that sits in your chest for weeks and only spills when you're too tired to hold it. Her hands trembled slightly as she buckled the boy into the seat beside Maxwell. Seat 2B. 18 inches between his world and hers, his Tom Ford suit her clearance hoodie, his Berluti briefcase her canvas backpack, his John Lobb shoes polished to glass her sneakers held together by habit and hope. 2 different lives, one shared armrest. Maxwell's jaw tightened. Not out of cruelty, not out of judgment, just the involuntary reaction of a man who had spent decades controlling every variable in his environment, suddenly confronted with one he couldn't control. A child, on a 14-hour flight. In the seat next to his, he put on his Bose 700 noise-canceling headphones, tilted the laptop screen slightly away. Body language polished and precise, no rudeness, no eye contact. Just a wall built from posture and expensive electronics. The universal language of "I am not available." The woman caught it. She was smart enough to read what he wasn't saying. "I'm sorry in advance," she said quietly. Voice rough, tired, not begging, not apologizing for her existence. Just informing. He's usually quiet, but this is his first time flying. Maxwell glanced up briefly, nodded once. "It's fine." 2 words, delivered with the warmth of a contract clause. Then the boy looked up at his mother and said something that in any other moment, on any other flight, would have meant absolutely nothing. "Mama, are we going to see Grandma for real this time?" Not on the phone, Martha swallowed. Her throat moved like she was pushing something heavy down before it could escape. She nodded. "For real this time, baby." The boy smiled, hugged his dinosaur tighter, went back to looking out the window at the ground crew loading luggage below. Martha turned her face toward the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow and afraid. She wiped her eyes with the cuff of her hoodie sleeve. She didn't know why she was crying. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe fear. Maybe because she was about to take her son halfway around the world to say goodbye to the only person who had ever looked at her and said, "I'm proud of you," and meant it down to the bone. Maxwell saw her reflection in the window. The tears she tried to hide. The way her shoulders curved inward, like she was trying to make herself smaller. He looked away, opened his laptop. That wasn't his business. Not yet. The first 6 hours passed the way long flights always do, slowly, in pieces. In the hum of engines and the occasional clink of glasses and the muffled shuffle of passengers rearranging themselves in spaces that were never quite comfortable enough, no matter how much the airline charged, Maxwell worked. He answered 43 emails, revised the Kuroda presentation twice, made a satellite call to his VP of Business Development in Tokyo, David Chen. Sharp, efficient, loyal. The kind of employee Maxwell respected because David never wasted his time. Kuroda's board confirmed the 9 a.m. meeting. David said, "Takeshi wants you there in person," he told me again. "He doesn't sign with companies, he signs with people." "I'll be there," Maxwell said. The legal team flagged 2 clauses in Section 9. Minor. "We can handle it on the ground. Send them to my inbox. I'll review before landing." Everything was on schedule. Everything was controlled. Every variable accounted for. This was how Maxwell operated. Precision. Discipline. No margin for distraction. Except, the distraction was 18 inches to his left, and she wasn't making noise. That was the problem. She was too quiet, too careful, too controlled, and it made him watch. Martha had turned the entire flight into a classroom for Elijah. When the seatbelt sign dinged and the boy flinched, she leaned in and explained what it meant. Calm, patient, like a teacher. When the meal service came, and Elijah wrinkled his nose at the chicken, Martha unzipped her backpack and pulled out a sandwich in a Ziploc bag. Peanut butter and jelly. Crusts cut off, cut diagonal, not in half, diagonal. Because that was how her son liked it. She knew the exact way her child wanted his sandwich cut. Maxwell couldn't remember the last meal he'd eaten that someone had made specifically for him. Not catered. Not prepared by a private chef. Just made. By someone who knew what he liked. Elijah didn't cry. Didn't fuss. Didn't kick the seat. He sat with Captain, the dinosaur in his lap, flipping through a coloring book that was almost full. Only 2 blank pages left. Martha had him count the seats he could see. Then count the windows. Then guess how many people were on the plane. She turned everything into a game, not because she was cheerful, because she had no other option except patience. No iPad, no tablet, no screen to hand him. Just herself and whatever she could invent from nothing. Maxwell caught himself staring. This woman was more exhausted than anyone he'd ever seen in a boardroom. He'd watched CEOs crack under the pressure of quarterly earnings calls. He'd seen executives break down during mergers. But none of them had the stamina of a single mother keeping a 5-year-old calm on a 14-hour flight with nothing but a backpack and a peanut butter sandwich. She hadn't stopped once, not to eat, not to close her eyes, not to lean back and breathe. Every second belonged to her son. Then, mid-call with David reviewing patent clause language, Maxwell heard it. "Mama, do airplanes go higher than heaven?" Martha went still. Just for a beat. Just long enough for the air between them to change temperature. "I think so, baby," she said softly. Maxwell lost the thread of David's sentence completely. The word heaven hit something he'd sealed shut 3 years ago. Something buried under slides and spreadsheets and the constant noise of building an empire. He blinked. "Sorry, David." "Say that again?" David repeated the clause. Maxwell typed, but his hands felt heavier than they should. He closed the laptop halfway. Not all the way, just enough to let his eyes drift. He noticed the boy's coloring book, the pages filled with careful strokes of crayon. He noticed Martha's hands, rough, nails short and uneven, working hands. He noticed the way she kept touching the boy's hair, absent, instinctive, like she was making sure he was still real. He wondered why she'd been crying before she boarded. Why she flew first class with a canvas backpack. Why the boy asked about seeing Grandma for real this time. What for real this time meant. What it cost her to be on this plane. But he didn't ask. That wasn't his business. Not yet. 6 hours and 14 minutes into the flight, the plane dropped. Not crashed, not dove, just dropped. The kind of sudden stomach-lurching turbulence that turns a calm cabin into a chapel full of silent prayers. The seatbelt sign flashed on with a sharp ding. Overhead bins rattled. A glass of water slid off a tray 3 rows back and shattered. The engines groaned as the aircraft pushed through a wall of unstable air somewhere over the mid-Atlantic. Elijah screamed. Not a tantrum scream, a terror scream. The kind that comes from a child who has never been 37,000 feet in the air before, who doesn't understand why the floor is shaking, who doesn't know that turbulence is normal. To him, the world was falling apart. And maybe in his 5-year-old mind it was. The cabin went still. Passengers gripped armrests. A businessman across the aisle white-knuckled his scotch. A woman 2 rows ahead pressed her hand flat against the ceiling. Maxwell removed his headphones. Martha moved like water. No hesitation, no panic. She unbuckled Elijah and pulled him into her lap in one motion. Her arms wrapped around him, hands pressed against his ears to muffle the noise. She tucked his face into her neck. His small body shook against hers. Captain the dinosaur pinned between their chests, and she began to whisper, not loud, not performative, just a mother talking to her child the way mothers have for thousands of years, low and steady and warm, a voice designed for exactly 1 pair of ears. But the seats were 18 inches apart, and Maxwell heard every word. It's okay, baby. Remember what we practiced. Brave doesn't mean not scared. Brave means scared, but still going. And when we land, Grandma is going to see how big you've gotten. She's going to be so proud. We're going to be her sunshine. Okay. Because that's what family does. We show up even when it's hard. Even when it hurts. We show up. That's the only thing that matters. We show up. 3 words. The simplest sentence in the English language. The kind of thing printed on greeting cards and stitched into throw pillows. Something 1,000 mothers have said to 1,000 children in 1,000 different moments of fear. But Maxwell Grant heard it like a detonation. We show up. That's the only thing that matters. Because he didn't. He didn't show up. Not when his mother was lying in room 412 asking for him. Not when she said his name over and over to a nurse who couldn't help. Not when Eleanor Grant, the woman who called him my little thunder, took her last breath, staring at an empty chair where her son was supposed to be sitting. He could have been there. He didn't need to save $800 million. He didn't need to fly across the country. He just needed to pick up the phone, walk out of the room, drive 90 minutes north, sit beside her, hold her hand. Say the things sons are supposed to say when the woman who built them is leaving the world. He chose a spreadsheet instead. His father's voice returned. Sharp, unforgiving. Not a whisper this time. A verdict. She waited for you, Maxwell. His hands gripped the armrests. Knuckles bone white. His jaw locked. His chest tightened, like something inside was trying to collapse and expand at the same time. He closed his eyes, not to sleep. To keep the water behind them from falling. This woman. This stranger in a clearance hoodie and worn-out sneakers. She saved for 14 months to fly her son across the ocean. She packed sandwiches with the crusts cut off. She turned a 14-hour flight into a classroom because she couldn't afford a tablet. And she was flying 7,000 miles to show up for her mother. To be there. To hold a hand. To say the things that need to be said while there was still someone alive to hear them. Maxwell had a private jet. He had a net worth that could buy the airline they were flying on. He had every resource, every advantage, every possible means to be anywhere in the world in under 12 hours. And when his mother needed him most, he chose a boardroom. The memory hit him like a wave he'd been outrunning for 3 years. March 14th, 3 years ago. The boardroom on the 47th floor of Grant Nexus headquarters in Manhattan, floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled below, like a circuit board of ambition and noise. 14 people around a table that cost more than a house. Slide 34 on the projector. Q3 revenue growth, a blue line climbing upward like it was trying to escape the screen. His VP was mid-sentence. Something about margins. Something about projections. Something that mattered enormously in that room and meant absolutely nothing in the room where his mother was dying 90 minutes north. His phone vibrated against the mahogany. He looked down. Vermont Medical Center. The same number that had been calling more frequently over the past 7 months. Each call shorter. Each one carrying a little more finality than the last. He looked at the number. Looked up at the slide. 14 faces waiting. $800 million in restructuring decisions hanging on his next sentence. He placed the phone face down on the table. Continue. One word. One syllable. The kind of decision that takes half a second to make and the rest of your life to live with. 4 hours later, he walked into Vermont Medical Center. Down the hallway that smelled of antiseptic and something worse. Something quieter. The smell of endings. Room 412. He pushed the door open, and the bed was empty. Not empty like someone had gone for a walk. Empty like someone had left and was never coming back. Sheets folded with hospital precision. Pillow smooth. No wrinkles. No impression of a head that had rested there just hours ago. On the nightstand, 3 things. A paperback novel dog-eared at page 147. She never finished it. A cup of tea, stone cold, the bag still floating in murky brown water. And a folded piece of paper, written in pencil, because by that morning Eleanor Grant no longer had the strength to press a pen. He picked up the letter. Stared at the handwriting. Shaky but deliberate. Every letter formed with effort. With intention. With the last reserves of a body that was shutting down but a heart that still had something left to say, he folded it, put it in his wallet, and he never opened it. The funeral was on a Tuesday. Gray sky. Vermont cold. The kind of cold that doesn't care about your coat. Henry Grant stood beside the casket he'd chosen himself. Pine. Simple. No gold handles. No silk. Just wood. Honest wood from an honest man who'd spent 40 years building things with his hands. Henry wore the only suit he owned. Navy blue. Fraying at the cuffs. He didn't look at Maxwell when he arrived. Not at first. He just stood there, one hand resting on the lid of the casket like he was holding on to the last solid thing in a world that had gone liquid. When he finally turned, his eyes held something worse than anger. Worse than grief. Disappointment, so deep it had calcified into something permanent. She waited for you, Maxwell. His voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It was flat and final, like a door closing. She kept asking where you were, and you chose money. Then he turned and walked away. And those were the last words Henry Grant spoke to his son. 3 years ago. 3 years of silence. 3 years of checks mailed to Vermont and returned unopened. 3 years of a father who'd rather live in quiet poverty than accept a single dollar from a son who'd failed the only test that ever mattered. Maxwell opened his eyes. The turbulence had passed. The cabin was calm again. The seatbelt sign clicked off with a quiet ding. Somewhere behind him, a flight attendant was apologizing for the disruption. Elijah was asleep in Martha's lap. Captain the dinosaur pressed between them. The boy's face was peaceful. Tear tracks drying on his round cheeks. Martha was looking out the window. Not at the clouds, not at the dark ocean below, just outward. Tears running silently down her face. She wiped them with her sleeve the way she probably always did, quietly, without asking anyone to notice. She had no idea what she'd just done. No idea that 3 words whispered to a frightened child had detonated something inside the man sitting 18 inches to her right. Something he'd spent 3 years building walls around. Concrete and steel, and silence and work and money, and the constant forward motion of a man who cannot afford to stop, because stopping means thinking, and thinking means remembering, and remembering means drowning. We show up. That's the only thing that matters. How many times had he not shown up? Her birthday. He sent flowers. An arrangement that cost $400 from a florist on Madison Avenue. A card signed by his assistant. Christmas. He called for 10 minutes, maybe 12, standing in the hallway outside a holiday party his company was hosting. He could hear laughter and clinking glasses through the wall while his mother talked about the snow in Vermont. "It's beautiful here, Maxwell. You should come see it." He said he'd try. He didn't try. The last time he sat with her. Actually sat. No phone, No laptop, no watch checking, no excuses about meetings or flights or deals. When was it? He searched his memory like a man rifling through drawers in the dark, and he couldn't find it. That was the part that scared him most. Not that he'd missed the end, but that he couldn't remember the last time he was fully present for any of it. Maxwell Grant could calculate the exact value of every deal he'd ever closed, down to the decimal. He could tell you the ROI on every acquisition, the margin on every quarter, the compound growth rate of his net worth over 2 decades. But he could not remember the last time he said, "I love you, Mom." He was the best in the world with numbers. But with the things that actually counted, he'd been bankrupt for years. The silence between them lasted a long time. Not awkward, not heavy, just present. The kind of silence that sits between two people who are both thinking about things they can't say out loud. Martha was stroking Elijah's hair. Small circles on his temple. Automatic. The way mothers do when their hands know something their minds are too tired to think about. Maxwell watched her fingers move. Gentle, rhythmic, patient. "He's a good kid," Maxwell said. His own voice surprised him. Low, rough, like it had been sitting in his throat for hours, waiting for permission to come out. Really quiet for his age. Martha looked up. Surprise flickered across her face. She hadn't expected the man with the noise-canceling headphones and the tilted laptop to speak. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that lives next door to exhaustion. "He's tired. We've been up since 3 a.m. 3 a.m. Maxwell tried to imagine what 3 a.m. looked like for this woman. Packing a backpack in a small apartment. Making sure the stuffed dinosaur was included. Checking documents. Worrying about money. Worrying about everything. "Where are you headed?" he asked. Not because he was making conversation, because he needed to hear her talk. He needed something real in a space that suddenly felt suffocating, despite the $12,000 they'd spent designing each first-class seat for maximum comfort. "Okinawa," Martha said. "My mother lives there." A pause. The kind of pause that holds its breath. "She's sick." 2 words. She's sick. But the way she said them. The way her voice cracked on the second word like a bone breaking under weight it had been carrying too long. Those 2 words told him everything. Maxwell didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't ask what kind of sick. He didn't offer condolences or platitudes or any of the meaningless phrases people throw at grief like confetti at a parade that nobody wanted. He just nodded. Because he knew. He knew that "I'm sorry" was the most useless sentence in the English language when someone was losing their mother. He knew because people had said it to him hundreds of times. At the funeral. In emails. In cards that arrived at his office in stacks. And not one of them had helped. Not one of them had brought Eleanor Grant back to room 412. His silence did something unexpected. It opened a door that questions would have kept shut. Martha kept talking. Not because he asked, because he didn't. 14 months, she said, looking down at Elijah. "That's how long I saved for these tickets." She said it the way someone says a fact they've lived with so long it's become furniture. Just there, part of the room. "I work as a CNA at a nursing home in Queens. 5 days a week. Weekends I clean at a hospital. Cash, $15 an hour." She adjusted Elijah's blanket. "My neighbor Mrs. Petrov. She watches Elijah when I work doubles. She's 68. Russian. Doesn't charge me anything. I do her grocery shopping in exchange. $180 a month. Sometimes $220. Set aside from a paycheck that barely covered rent and food and bus fare and the 1,000 invisible costs of raising a child alone. 14 months of instant coffee instead of real coffee. 14 months of wearing scrubs home because buying new clothes wasn't in the budget. 14 months of cutting Elijah's hair herself over the kitchen sink because $12 at the barber was $12 she couldn't spare. Maxwell wanted to ask why she didn't borrow money, why she didn't ask for help, why she carried this weight alone when there were people, organizations, systems designed to assist. But he knew the answer. He knew it the way rich people know things about poverty without ever having lived it. When you're poor, you don't have people to ask. You don't have credit to borrow against. You don't have a safety net or a backup plan or a father with a workshop in Vermont you can call when the world gets heavy. And he knew something else. Something that sat in his chest like a stone. He had everything, every resource, every connection, every possible advantage the modern world could offer a human being. And when his mother needed him, he didn't need to save for 14 months. He didn't need to work doubles or skip coffee or borrow from a neighbor. He just needed to put the phone down. Walk out of the room, drive 90 minutes. And he didn't. Martha saved for 14 months to show up. Maxwell just needed to set down a phone. The price Martha paid was immeasurably larger, but only one of them actually arrived in time. Martha didn't tell her story all at once. It came out in pieces, like pulling threads from a fabric that was already thin enough to see through. "I got married when I was 23, she said, her voice settling into that flat, factual tone people use when they've told a story so many times it stops hurting, or when they've decided it has to stop hurting because they can't afford the luxury of pain. His name was Derek. Plumber, funny, good hands. The kind of guy who could fix anything in a house except the things that were actually broken." She paused. Elijah shifted in her lap. She waited until he settled. When Elijah was 18 months, Derek left. Not for another woman. Not because of a fight. He just woke up one morning and decided he wasn't built for it. For fatherhood. For staying. For the weight of being needed by something so small and so permanent. She said it without bitterness, without tears. Just fact. He said, "I wasn't built for this." And then he just left. No slamming doors, no screaming matches, no dramatic exit, just an absence. One morning, Martha woke up at 5:15 for her early shift, and the alarm didn't go off. Derek had turned it off before he left, so he wouldn't wake Elijah. That was his last act of fatherhood, silencing an alarm clock on his way out the door. She moved to a studio apartment in Queens, $1,400 a month. Elijah got the bed. Martha slept on a folding chair that she opened every night and closed every morning. CNA work during the week, bathing elderly patients, changing sheets, helping them eat, $18.60 an hour. Weekends at the hospital, mopping floors, sanitizing rooms, $15 an hour. Cash, no benefits, no questions. The math was simple and merciless. Rent plus childcare plus food plus bus fare equaled exactly what she earned. Not a dollar more, not a dollar less. Just enough meant no coffee shops. Just enough meant wearing her nursing scrubs home because buying street clothes wasn't in the equation. Just enough meant cutting Elijah's hair over the kitchen sink with scissors she'd bought at a dollar store 3 years ago. She didn't complain about any of it. She listed these facts the way an accountant reads a balance sheet. Numbers, entries, a life reduced to arithmetic. Her mother, Gloria Calloway, married Staff Sergeant Ronald Calloway when Martha was 12. Ronald was stationed in Okinawa. Gloria followed him, built a life on the other side of the world, learned to garden in volcanic soil, made friends at the base, found peace in a country she never expected to call home. Ronald died 4 years ago, lung cancer. Gloria stayed. "This is Ronald's home," she told Martha, on the phone. "I'm not leaving his garden." 8 months ago, Gloria called Martha on a video chat. The connection was grainy. The lighting in Gloria's small house was warm and yellow. Martha could see the garden through the window behind her mother. The bonsai Ronald had planted. The stone path he'd laid by hand. "Baby, I need to tell you something. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave her 6 to 8 months. That was 8 months ago. Now the estimate was 2, maybe 3, maybe less." Martha didn't have a passport. She'd never left the United States. Never needed to. She applied for 2, hers and Elijah's. $230. She borrowed it from Mrs. Petrov. 2 economy tickets. JFK to Narita to Okinawa. $1,840 for both. 14 months of saving. $180 to $220 a month. Every dollar pulled from a life that had no margins left. When she told her supervisor at the nursing home she needed 2 weeks off, the response was immediate. "If you leave, I can't guarantee your position when you come back." Martha looked at her supervisor, a woman sitting behind a desk, making decisions about other people's lives with the casual authority of someone who has never had to choose between a paycheck and a parent. "I understand," Martha said, and she walked out. At the check-in counter at JFK, the agent typed for a long time, frowned, typed again, then looked up. "Ma'am, economy is overbooked on this flight. We're upgrading you and your son to first class. No additional charge." Martha stared at her. "I don't understand." "First class. Seats 2B and 2C. You'll board with Group 1. Martha had never been in first class. She didn't know what it meant. She imagined slightly bigger chairs, maybe extra legroom. She did not imagine Poltrona Frau leather and Dom Perignon, and a man in a $12,000 suit sitting next to her carrying a briefcase worth more than her annual salary. Elijah tugged her hand as they walked down the jetway. "Mama, why is the chair so big?" "I don't know, baby. Just sit down and be good." 3 days before the flight, Elijah had asked her a question while she was packing the backpack. "Mama, do we have to go?" She knelt down, looked him in the eyes, took both his hands in hers. "Yes, baby. Some things you can't do on a phone. Some things you have to do with your hands and your heart and your whole body there. Show up. The only thing that matters." What Martha didn't know, what most people don't realize, is that her decision to fly 7,000 miles wasn't just an act of love. Science actually backs her up. Research published in the Journal of Pain and Symptom Management found that terminally ill patients who had family members physically present reported pain levels that were 23% lower than those who didn't. Not because the family did anything medical, not because they administered drugs or adjusted equipment, just because they were there, in the room, breathing the same air, holding a hand, sitting in a chair. The human body responds to presence in ways we're only beginning to understand. Physical proximity to a loved one triggers the release of oxytocin, the bonding hormone, the one that tells your nervous system you're not alone. At the same time, cortisol drops, the stress hormone, the one that keeps your body in fight or flight mode even when there's nothing left to fight. This happens in both directions. The patient feels it. The visitor feels it. Two nervous systems, connected by decades of shared history, calming each other down without a single word spoken. There's something else, something harder to explain. Doctors call it terminal lucidity. Many patients in their final days, sometimes final hours, experience a sudden return of clarity, a burst of awareness. They recognize faces they haven't responded to in weeks. They speak full sentences after days of silence. They laugh. They tell stories. They say the things they've been saving. And it often happens when someone arrives, when the person they've been waiting for finally walks through the door. Martha wasn't just being emotional. She wasn't just following instinct. She was, without knowing it, giving her mother the most powerful medicine no hospital can prescribe. Not a drug, not a treatment, just the knowledge that she wasn't forgotten, that someone crossed an ocean to sit beside her, that someone showed up. Not everyone gets that chance. Some people learn the value of showing up only after the door has closed permanently, after the bed has been stripped, after the tea has gone cold on the nightstand, after the letter sits folded in a wallet for 3 years, unread, because opening it would mean admitting that you failed the one person who never failed you. If this story is hitting close to home, subscribe for more stories like this. Now, let's go back to that flight. The silence lasted a long time. The kind of silence that doesn't need filling. The kind that sits between two people who have just exchanged something heavier than words. Martha was looking at Elijah, stroking his hair, breathing slowly. The cabin lights had dimmed to that blue-gray twilight airlines use to trick your body into thinking it's nighttime. Most of the passengers around them were asleep. The engine hummed its low, constant note. The world outside the window was black. Then Maxwell spoke. Not because he planned to, not because he decided it was the right moment, but because the thing inside him that had been sealed shut for 3 years had cracked open, and what was behind it couldn't stay there anymore. "My mother died 3 years ago." Martha looked at him. Her eyes searched his face the way someone searches for something they recognize. Something familiar. "Cancer?" she asked. "Pancreatic?" One word, the same word. The same disease, the same verdict handed down by the same indifferent biology. Martha didn't gasp, didn't reach for his arm, didn't say, "Oh my God," or "I'm so sorry." She just nodded, slowly. Because she understood something most people don't. That when you hear the same sentence that's been playing on repeat in your own head come out of a stranger's mouth, there's nothing to say. There's only the recognition that you're both standing in the same dark room. "I was in a meeting when the hospital called," Maxwell said. His voice was low, flat, like someone reading from a transcript of the worst day of their life. "I saw the number. I didn't pick up." He didn't explain why. Didn't offer context. Didn't say it was a critical meeting. Didn't say he thought he had more time. Didn't say any of the things he'd rehearsed in the 3 years since, the justifications he'd built like scaffolding around a building that was already rubble. He just said the truth. The stripped-down, ugly, irreducible truth. "I saw the number. I didn't pick up." Martha didn't say "I'm sorry," and Maxwell was grateful for that, in a way that surprised him. Because she understood what he'd learned the hard way. That "I'm sorry" is the most useless sentence in the language of grief. People throw it at you like small change. It costs them nothing and buys you nothing, and when they walk away, they feel better, and you feel exactly the same. "She wrote me a letter," Maxwell said. The words came out before he could stop them, like pulling a thread that unravels something you've been wearing for years. "That morning, before she died." The nurse said she wrote it early, when she still had enough strength to hold a pencil. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out his wallet, opened it, and from behind his driver's license and a black Amex and a business card he'd never given to anyone, he pulled out a piece of paper, folded in quarters, edges soft and worn from 3 years pressed against leather. The creases were so deep they'd become part of the paper's identity, like scars. "I've carried it for 3 years," he said, holding it between his thumb and forefinger. "Every day, every flight, every meeting. It's been in this wallet through 18 countries and God knows how many boardrooms." Martha looked at the letter. Then, at him. "Have you read it?" "No." The word hung in the air between them. Martha waited. "I'm afraid of what it says," Maxwell admitted, and saying it out loud made it more real than he'd ever allowed it to be. "I'm afraid she's angry, that she spent her last morning writing down all the ways I failed her, all the times I chose work over her, all the birthdays I missed, and Christmases I cut short, and phone calls I took in hallways while she waited." He paused, swallowed. The next part was harder. "But I'm more afraid she's not angry. I'm more afraid she forgave me. Because if she forgave me, it means she still loved me even after everything. And that's worse. That's so much worse, because it means I didn't deserve her, and I knew it. And I let her die alone anyway." Martha looked at him for a long time. Not with pity, not with judgment, with the steady clarity of a woman who bathes dying strangers for a living and knows exactly what regret looks like when it's been sitting in someone's chest for years. "Read it," she said. "I can't. You're sitting on an airplane 35,000 feet above the ocean, going somewhere you don't need to be, carrying a letter from your dead mother that you're too scared to read." She paused. "I think you can." Maxwell looked at the letter, turned it over in his hands, felt the weight of it. Not physical weight. Paper weighs almost nothing. But this paper carried 3 years of silence and guilt, and the last words of a woman who made potato soup on Sundays and called her son "my little thunder" and died asking for him in a room he couldn't be bothered to enter. He slid it back into his wallet, closed the flap. "Not yet," he said quietly. Martha nodded. She didn't push, she didn't lecture, she didn't tell him he was making a mistake. Because she was also flying toward her mother without knowing what she would say when she got there. She was also carrying words she hadn't figured out yet. She understood that some letters need to be read at the right time, and the right time isn't always when someone else decides it should be. His father's voice returned. "She waited for you, Maxwell. But this time it sounded different. Not an accusation, not a judgment, something closer to a plea. She waited, not because she was angry, because she loved you." And somewhere in that folded piece of paper and shaky pencil on hospital stationery, the proof of that love was waiting for him. The question wasn't whether Eleanor Grant had waited. She had. The question was whether Maxwell would finally show up. Not for her. She was gone. But for the letter. For his father in Vermont. For himself. Elijah stirred. His eyes opened slowly the way children's eyes do. Not all at once, in stages. First confusion, then recognition, then curiosity. He saw Maxwell and pulled Captain closer to his chest. Shy. Uncertain. The way any 5-year-old would be waking up next to a stranger in a suit, Martha noticed. Elijah, this is Mr. Grant. He's very nice. Maxwell had no idea what to say to a child. He'd never had children, never spent time with them. His life was populated by adults in suits who spoke in acronyms and quarterly projections. The smallest person in his daily orbit was his 26-year-old junior analyst. Elijah looked at him with those enormous brown eyes, then looked at Captain, then back at Maxwell. Do you have a dinosaur too? Maxwell almost laughed. Almost. No, but I had a stuffed bear when I was your age. His name was Sargent. Martha glanced at him, surprised. The image of this man, this billionaire in his Tom Ford suit with his Patek Philippe watch holding a stuffed bear named Sargent, was so incongruent it was almost funny. Did Sargent go on airplanes? Elijah asked. No. He mostly stayed in bed and guarded my pillow. Elijah considered this with the seriousness of a 5-year-old evaluating critical information. Captain goes everywhere, he said. He's brave. I can see that, Maxwell said. And then something happened that Maxwell hadn't anticipated. The boy smiled. A real smile. The kind that hasn't learned to be strategic or polite or performed. Just pure. Just warm. Just a child deciding that a stranger was okay. Maxwell smiled back. And it was the first genuine smile that had crossed his face since boarding this plane. Maybe longer. And in that small, unremarkable moment, he remembered something. Sargent the bear was a Christmas gift. He was 4 years old. His mother had wrapped it in newspaper because they couldn't afford wrapping paper that year. His father was between jobs. They were living in the small house in Vermont with the drafty windows and the wood stove that smoked when the wind came from the north. She'd handed him the package and said, "Every boy needs someone to guard his pillow." He hadn't thought about Sargent in decades. The bear was probably still in a box in his mother's attic, in the house where his father now lived alone. Elijah pulled out his coloring book, flipped through it. Almost every page was filled, crayon strokes in every direction, some careful, some wild. Only 2 blank pages remained. "Mama, I'm almost out of pages." Martha looked at the book. "I know, baby. I'm sorry. I didn't have time to get a new one." Maxwell reached into his Berluti briefcase and pulled out a stack of white paper, meeting notes, prep documents for the Kuroda presentation, graphs and projections and executive summaries worth months of work from 47 employees. He held them out to Elijah. "You can draw on these. The backsides are blank." Elijah took the paper like it was treasure, pulled out a crayon, green, and started drawing. A dinosaur with wings, flying over what appeared to be an airplane. Underneath, in large, uneven letters, he wrote, "Captoon flies." The spelling was wrong. The proportions were impossible. The wings were bigger than the body. And it was without question the most honest piece of art Maxwell had ever seen. When the meal service came, Martha hesitated. The menu was printed on heavy cardstock. Wagyu beef, pan-seared salmon, truffle risotto. The kind of food that belonged in a world Martha had never visited. "Order whatever you want," Maxwell said. "Both of you." Martha looked uncomfortable. "We're fine. I have granola bars in my bag." "Please," Maxwell said. And the way he said it wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was the voice of a man who hadn't shared a meal with anyone in a very long time and was realizing at 35,000 feet that he missed it. Martha ordered the salmon. Elijah got the pasta. When it arrived, the boy's eyes went wide. He stared at the plate like it was a magic trick. "Mama, this is the best spaghetti ever. It's penne, baby." "Penne." Elijah repeated, testing the word like a new toy. Penne. I like penne. Martha laughed. A real laugh, short and quiet, but real. And Maxwell watched her face transform for just a moment from exhaustion into something lighter. Something younger. Something that looked like the person she might have been before life decided to test her in every possible way. Elijah fell asleep again after the meal. Captain tucked under his arm, mouth slightly open. The drawing of the flying dinosaur resting on the tray table beside him. Martha and Maxwell sat in the dimmed cabin. The engine droned. The Pacific stretched beneath them, invisible and enormous. Two strangers at 35,000 feet. One in a $12,000 suit. One in a clearance hoodie. They shared no history, no social circle, no zip code, no tax bracket. But they shared the same wound. The wound of a mother. The wound of time running out. The wound of wondering in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn whether you were doing enough, whether showing up was enough, whether anything was ever enough. Maxwell's phone lit up. An email from David Chen in Tokyo, landing in 7 hours. Final prep meeting confirmed for 8 a.m. local time. Kuroda board is assembled. This is it, Max. Don't overthink it. Just show up and close. Show up. Maxwell read the email twice. Looked at the sleeping boy beside him. Looked at Martha, whose eyes were closed, but whose breathing wasn't the breathing of someone asleep. Looked back at the screen. $2.3 billion. 18 months of work. 47 people. 3 patents. 1 meeting. For the first time in his career, $2.3 billion felt like a very small number. The Kuroda deal was the kind of acquisition that gets studied in business schools. Kuroda Systems, founded in Kyoto in 1989 by Takeshi Kuroda, a 67-year-old engineer who'd built the company from a 2-room office into a 1,200-person operation holding 3 core patents in natural language processing that every major tech company on Earth wanted. If Grant Nexus acquired Kuroda, they'd vault into the top 3 enterprise AI companies globally. The projections showed 40% revenue growth over 5 years. The stock price would double, Bloomberg would run a profile, Fortune would put him on the cover again. Maxwell had pursued this deal for 18 months. His team of 47 people had worked nights, weekends, holidays. Legal had spent 4 months on the contract alone. The CFO had run the numbers so many times the spreadsheet had its own spreadsheet, and Takeshi Kuroda had one condition, one requirement that no amount of money or legal maneuvering could satisfy. I don't sign with companies. Takeshi had said 2 weeks ago over a video call, his voice calm and precise. I sign with people. If you want Kuroda Systems, you sit across from me. You look me in the eye. And we decide together whether our visions are compatible. No proxies, no delegates, no representatives. Maxwell Grant in person or no deal. His phone buzzed again. The CFO this time. Final numbers locked, contract ready for signature. Legal cleared sections 7 through 12. We're green across the board. Then the VP. Logistics confirmed. Car will meet you at Narita. Hotel is booked. Prep room reserved at the Kuroda offices. Then a board member calling on the satellite phone. Direct. Unfiltered. Max, listen to me. This is the one. 18 months of work. Don't mess this up. The world of business pressed against him from every direction. Numbers, schedules, expectations, obligations. The machinery of a $9.7 billion empire demanding its CEO perform his function. Show up, close, win. Move to the next deal. Maxwell looked at his laptop screen. The revenue projection chart. A blue line climbing steadily upward for 5 years. Clean, predictable, measurable. Every data point accounted for. Every variable controlled. Then he looked to his left. Elijah curled in his seat. Captain wedged under his chin, mouth open, breathing the slow, deep breaths of a child who has no idea that the world is complicated. On the tray table, the drawing. A dinosaur with impossible wings flying over an airplane. Captain Fliss. No revenue projections. No 5-year forecast. No measurable ROI, just a green crayon and a beautiful misspelled belief that dinosaurs can fly. 2 charts, 2 versions of the future, one measured in billions, the other measured in crayon. Maxwell closed the laptop halfway. If he closed the Kuroda deal, what happened next? Another line on his resume. Another paragraph in his Wikipedia entry. Another press release. Another round of congratulations from people who would forget about it in 6 weeks. And then another deal. And another. And another. An endless conveyor belt of acquisitions and exits and quarterly calls. More nights in hotel rooms. More meals eaten alone. More phone calls from his father that never came because his father stopped calling 3 years ago. And how many more letters left unread? How many more people left waiting in rooms he was too busy to enter? He was flying 14 hours to what everyone in his life called the most important meeting of his career. But sitting in the dark, at 35,000 feet watching a stranger's child sleep, Maxwell was beginning to suspect that the most important meeting of his life might not be in Tokyo at all. Martha was the one who finally said it. Not because she was trying to change his mind. She didn't even know there was a mind to change. She was just talking, the way people talk in the dark on airplanes. Honestly. Without armor. You know what scares me most, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elijah was still asleep. The cabin lights were off. They were somewhere over the Pacific, suspended between continents, between time zones, between the lives they'd left and the lives waiting for them on the ground. It's not that my mother is dying. Everyone dies. I learned that a long time ago. She paused, looked at her hands. Working hands. Rough from years of lifting and cleaning and holding and carrying. What scares me is arriving too late. Getting off the plane and walking into that house and realizing I waited too long to say the things I needed to say. That I spent 14 months saving for a plane ticket when I should have been spending those 14 months finding any way to get there sooner. Her voice cracked at the edges. I don't want I should have to be the sentence I carry for the rest of my life. I should have. 2 words, the heaviest 2 words in any language. Maxwell felt them land in his chest like stones dropped into still water. Because I should have was exactly the sentence he'd been carrying for 3 years. I should have picked up the phone. I should have left the meeting. I should have driven to Vermont. I should have held her hand. I should have said goodbye. I should have. I should have. I should have. Martha didn't know she'd just described his entire existence in 2 sentences. She wasn't giving a speech. She wasn't trying to inspire him. She was just a tired woman on a long flight, whispering her fears into the dark, because the dark felt safe enough to hold them. Maxwell stood up. Not slowly, not dramatically. He just stood. Walked to the galley area between first class and business. Took the satellite phone off the wall mount. Dialed David Chen in Tokyo. 2 rings. Max. What's up? You should be sleeping. Big day tomorrow. Cancel the meeting. Silence. The kind of silence that has a texture. Heavy. Disbelieving. I'm sorry. What? Cancel the Kuroda meeting. Reschedule. Postpone. Whatever it takes. I can't be there tomorrow. Max. David's voice dropped into that controlled, careful register people use when they think someone is making a catastrophic mistake. This is a $2.3 billion acquisition. Takeshi Kuroda is assembling his full board. 18 months of work. 47 people. I know, he said. He won't wait. If you're not there in person, the deal is off. Then the deal is off. Another silence. Longer this time. Max, are you okay? Is this a medical thing? Because I can call a doctor at Narita and have them meet the plane. I'm fine. Cancel the meeting, David. Handle the board. Handle the press if it leaks. I'll call Takeshi personally within the week. Can you at least tell me why? Maxwell looked back toward his seat. He could see Martha's shoulder, Elijah's small foot poking out from under a blanket. No, he said. I can't. He hung up. Stood there for a moment. The galley was small and bright and smelled like reheated coffee. A flight attendant glanced at him. He didn't notice. He walked back to his seat, sat down, looked at his phone. There was a number he'd deleted from his contacts 3 years ago. but he knew it by heart. He dialed it 1,000 times in his mind and hung up before it rang every single time. He typed the number. His thumb hovered over the call button. 10 digits. A carpenter's landline in Vermont. The phone sat on a table by the kitchen window, next to a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest dad," that Maxwell had bought as a joke when he was 16. His mother had laughed so hard, she spilled her tea. His father had pretended to be offended for 3 days. He pressed call. 1 ring. 2, 3, 4. He was sure no one would answer. It was late in Vermont. His father went to bed early. His father probably didn't even hear the phone. His father probably wouldn't pick up even if he did. Why would he? 3 years of silence. 3 years of returned checks. 3 years of a question that had no good answer. Where were you? 5 rings. 6. Then a click. And a voice. Old, rough, like sandpaper on oak. Like the smell of sawdust and machine oil and morning coffee, brewed too strong in a kitchen that hadn't changed since 1984. "Hello," Maxwell's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Not a word. Not a sound. Just air. Just the mechanical exhale of a man whose body was trying to speak while his throat was trying to close. Henry waited. He didn't hang up. He didn't say hello again. He just waited. The way you wait when you've been waiting for 3 years, and you can feel that the thing you've been waiting for is finally on the other end of the line trying to find its voice. 10 seconds of silence, transmitted through a satellite link from 35,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean to a kitchen in Vermont where a 71-year-old carpenter stood by a window in the dark, holding a phone that hadn't rung with his son's number in 1,095 days. Dad. 1 word, 1 syllable, broken in the middle like a piece of wood, split along the grain. Maxwell. A pause, long enough for the entire Pacific to stretch between them. Then Henry spoke again. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It was tired. The kind of tired that comes from holding a grudge that was never really a grudge. It was grief wearing the costume of anger because grief was too heavy to carry without a frame. She would have wanted you to call. "I know." Maxwell's voice fractured, completely. The way glass breaks, not from a single impact, but from the accumulation of 1,000 tiny stresses over time. "I know, Dad. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And then Maxwell Grant, CEO of Grant Nexus Technologies, net worth $9.7 billion, the man Bloomberg profiled and Fortune put on their cover, cried. On a commercial airplane, in a first-class cabin, surrounded by strangers, with a satellite phone pressed against his ear, and 3 years of unshed grief pouring out of him like water from a dam that had finally mercifully given way. He didn't cry quietly. He didn't cry with dignity. He cried the way men cry when they've held it in so long that the release feels like violence, shoulders shaking, breath coming in short, ragged pulls, the sound escaping his throat raw and animal and utterly beyond his control. Martha heard it. She opened her eyes, looked at him, saw the phone pressed to his ear, saw his shoulders convulsing, saw the tears running down the face of a man who had probably not cried in front of another human being in decades. She didn't say a word. She reached over and pulled the airline blanket higher on Elijah's shoulders, tucked it around his small body. Then she turned her face toward the window, giving Maxwell the only thing she could give him in that moment: privacy, space, the grace of being unseen during the most vulnerable moment of his life. Because Martha Calloway was a CNA at a nursing home in Queens, she watched people cry every single day. She held the hands of strangers as they wept for parents and spouses and children and lives that were ending or already gone. She knew the geography of grief, the way pilots know the geography of sky. And she knew that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone who is falling apart is absolutely nothing. Just be there. Just let them break. Just show up and let the silence do the work. On the other end of the satellite line, Henry Grant stood in his dark kitchen in Vermont. And for the first time in 3 years, he didn't hang up. "She waited for you, Maxwell." But this time, the words didn't cut. They didn't accuse. They didn't punish. This time Maxwell heard them the way they were always meant to be heard, not as an indictment, as a declaration of love. She waited because she loved him, not despite his failure, through it, past it, beyond it, and the letter in his wallet, the one he'd been too afraid to read for 3 years, the one written in pencil by a dying woman on a Tuesday morning in Vermont. Maybe it didn't contain what he feared. Maybe it wasn't full of accusations and disappointments and a list of every time he chose wrong. Maybe, just maybe, it held something worse than anger, something more terrifying than blame: forgiveness. The wheels hit the runway at Narita International Airport at 7:42 a.m. local time. The sound was sharp and sudden, metal on concrete. The whole cabin shuddered, overhead bins rattled, the engines roared in reverse. And then slowly the plane began to settle into the ordinary rhythm of arrival. Taxiing, dinging, the click of seatbelts releasing, the rustle of passengers remembering they had somewhere to be. Elijah's eyes opened. He looked around confused for a moment, the way children do when they wake up in a place that isn't their bed. Then he saw the window, sunlight pouring through, buildings in the distance, a sky that looked different from the one in Queens. "Are we at Grandma's?" Martha smoothed his hair. "Almost, baby." One more flight. The cabin came alive around them. Passengers stood. Bags appeared from overhead bins. The choreography of disembarkation practiced and automatic. Maxwell closed his laptop, slid it into his briefcase. The Kuroda presentation still open on slide 37. A slide that no longer mattered the way it had 14 hours ago. They walked up the jetway together, not side by side, not like companions, just two passengers moving in the same direction through the same narrow corridor toward the same terminal. When they reached the gate area, they stopped. The flow of people parted around them like water around two stones in a river. Maxwell didn't know what to say. 14 hours of conversation, of silence, of tears, of truth. And now he was standing in an airport terminal with fluorescent lights overhead and departure boards clicking, and he couldn't find a single word that felt adequate. Martha didn't seem to need one. Elijah broke the silence. He tugged on Maxwell's sleeve, held up a piece of paper, folded once unevenly, the way 5-year-olds fold things. Maxwell took it, opened it. A green dinosaur with impossible wings flying over a blue airplane. Clouds that look like cotton balls, a sun with a smiley face, and at the bottom in large crooked letters, "For M.R. Grant from Elijah." Maxwell held the drawing the way he'd held his mother's letter, like it was evidence of something he'd almost stopped believing in, that strangers could matter, that 14 hours could change a life, that a child with a stuffed dinosaur and a box of crayons could hand you something worth more than a $2.3 billion acquisition. "I hope you get there in time," he said to Martha. His voice was steady, quiet. "I hope your mother sees how strong you are, and I hope Elijah remembers this trip forever." Martha looked at him, those tired, honest eyes. "I hope you read that letter, Mr. Grant." She didn't say anything else, didn't hug him, didn't cry, just nodded once, took Elijah's hand, and walked toward the connecting gate for Okinawa. Maxwell watched them go. The canvas backpack, the clearance hoodie, the small boy clutching Captain, looking back once to wave. Then they disappeared into the crowd. He sat down. Gate 47. Alone. The terminal buzzed around him. Announcements in Japanese and English. The smell of coffee from a kiosk nearby. A businessman rushing past, phone pressed to his ear saying something urgent about quarterly figures. Maxwell reached into his wallet, pulled out the letter, held it in both hands. The paper was soft, the creases deep, 3 years of being carried without being opened. His hands shook. He unfolded it, slowly. One fold, two. The paper opened like something that had been waiting a long time to breathe. Pencil, shaky strokes, letters formed with effort by a hand that was running out of strength but not out of love. "My little Thunder, I know you're busy saving the world. I just want you to know. I'm not angry. I was never angry. I'm just proud. So proud it hurts. Come home when you can. I'll be here. Or if I'm not, I'll be somewhere close watching. Love always, Mom. Maxwell read it 3 times. Each time the words landed harder. Not because they were harsh, because they were the opposite. She wasn't angry. She was never angry. She was proud. Proud of a son who didn't pick up the phone. Proud of a man who chose a spreadsheet over her hand. Proud despite everything. Because that's what mothers do. They love past the failure. Through it. Beyond it. Into eternity. She waited for you, Maxwell. Yes, she did. Not because she was angry. Because she loved him. And she was still waiting. Somewhere. Watching. Close. He folded the letter. Placed it back in his wallet. Beside the drawing of a flying dinosaur from a boy named Elijah. 2 letters. One from the dead. One from the living. Both saying the same thing. You matter. You are loved. Come home. Maxwell stood up. He did not walk toward the departure gate for Tokyo. He walked toward the ticket counter, and he bought a seat on the next flight to Burlington, Vermont. 48 hours later, a rental car turned off Route 100 into a narrow road lined with bare maples and snow. The kind of road that doesn't lead to corporations or airports or boardrooms. The kind that leads to a house someone built with their hands and lived in for 40 years. Henry Grant's house sat at the end of that road, small, white paint peeling at the corners, a porch with a wooden swing that hadn't been painted since Eleanor was alive. The garage door was open, inside the warm glow of a work light, the sound of a hand plane moving across wood, steady, rhythmic, the sound of a man who had spent his whole life making things instead of acquiring them. Maxwell parked the car, turned off the engine, and sat there. 5 minutes. Maybe more. His hands on the steering wheel, his breath fogging the windshield, the letter in his wallet, the drawing in his briefcase, a $9.7 billion empire waiting for his return. And none of it mattered as much as the 10 feet of snowy ground between his car door and his father's garage. He got out. His John Lobb shoes sank into the snow. The cold hit his face like a correction, like Vermont, reminding him that the world was real and physical and not made of slides and spreadsheets and satellite phone calls. He walked, each step crunching, the only sound in the whole valley. No traffic, no engines, no Bloomberg alerts, just snow and silence and the distant scraping of a hand plane. Henry looked up. His hands stopped moving. He held the plane against the wood, sawdust on his flannel shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. 71 years old, hands like bark, eyes like a man who had been waiting for something he'd stopped expecting. He didn't speak. He just looked at his son, standing in the snow. Tom Ford suit, Italian shoes, a billionaire who looked exactly as out of place as a single mother in a first-class cabin. Dad. Henry set the plane down on the workbench, slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything. You came, he said. Not a question. A confirmation. The way you confirm that a thing you'd almost given up on has finally arrived. I should have come sooner. Yes, Henry said. You should have. Silence. The work light buzzed. Sawdust floated in the warm air of the garage. Somewhere outside a bird called from a bare branch. Then Henry turned, walked into the house, left the door open, wider than it needed to be. Coffee's on. Come in before you freeze. The kitchen was small, warm. It smelled like oak and strong coffee and something Maxwell couldn't name at first. Then he realized. It smelled like his childhood, like Sunday mornings, like potato soup and cinnamon toast, and the sound of his mother humming while she grated papers at the table. Eleanor's photos were everywhere. On the shelf, above the stove, on the refrigerator held by magnets from places she'd visited, beside the salt shaker on the dining table. Her coffee mug still sat in the dish rack, blue ceramic, chipped at the handle, never put away, never washed, for the last time. Just there, waiting, like she was. Maxwell sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd eaten cereal before school, where he'd done homework, where his mother had helped him practice spelling words by writing them on index cards in her careful teacher's handwriting. The wood was scratched and stained, and more valuable than every piece of furniture in his Manhattan penthouse combined. Henry poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of Maxwell, sat across from him, didn't say anything, didn't hug him, didn't cry, just sat, coffee, silence, presence, and that was enough. For now, that was enough. 7,000 miles away in a small house on a quiet street in Okinawa, Martha Calloway knocked on a door. The house was modest, traditional, tile roof, a stone path through a garden where an American soldier had planted bonsai trees 20 years ago and a widow had kept them alive ever since. Wind chimes made of seashells hung from the eave. They clinked softly in the Pacific breeze. The door opened. Gloria Calloway stood in the frame. Thin, a blue headscarf covering what chemotherapy had taken. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She was 61 years old and looked older. But her eyes were fire and water and everything in between when she saw the boy standing behind her daughter. Elijah stood frozen. He'd only ever seen this woman through a screen, a face in a rectangle, a voice with a half-second delay, pixelated smiles on birthday calls that cut out when the Wi-Fi dropped. This was different. This was real. This was 3 dimensions and warm air, and the smell of jasmine from the garden, and a grandmother who was actually physically impossibly here. Gloria lowered herself to her knees, slowly, painfully, her hands reaching out, shaking. My beautiful boy. Elijah didn't move for a moment. Then he ran, slammed into her arms with the full force of a 5-year-old who'd been waiting his entire life for this hug. Captain got crushed between them. Neither of them cared. Martha stood behind them, tears running freely, her hand over her mouth, watching her son hold her mother for the first time. For real this time, not on the phone. In Vermont, Maxwell and Henry sat in the kitchen. Neither spoke. The coffee cooled. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside snow fell on Eleanor's garden, covering the ground she used to tend every spring. In Okinawa, Martha sat in the garden with Gloria, while Elijah drew pictures of dinosaurs on the porch. Gloria held Martha's hand, weak fingers wrapped around strong ones. The bonsai cast small shadows in the afternoon light. 2 places, 11,000 kilometers apart, 2 different stories, 2 different families, 2 different kinds of grief, but the same choice. Show up, be there, sit in the silence or fill it with tears, or just hold someone's hand while the clock ticks and the world keeps spinning and the time you have left shrinks with every breath. Showing up doesn't always come with a perfect ending. Henry didn't forgive Maxwell that afternoon. Forgiveness isn't a switch, it's a road, and they were at the beginning of it. The coffee was a first step. The open door was a second. But the years of silence and the weight of that empty hospital bed and the words she waited for you didn't dissolve over 1 cup of coffee in a Vermont kitchen. They would take time. They would take more visits, more silence, more showing up. And Gloria was still dying. Martha's presence didn't cure cancer. The tumor didn't shrink because a daughter flew 7,000 miles. The prognosis didn't change because a grandson drew pictures of flying dinosaurs on the porch every morning. But some things matter more than outcomes. Some things matter more than results. The choice, the act, the showing up itself. That's what counts, not what happens after, but that you came, that you tried, that you walked through the door, even though you didn't know what to say when you got there. 3 months later, Maxwell Grant's life looked different. Not unrecognizably different. Not the dramatic reinvention that movies love to show. He didn't sell the company. He didn't move to a cabin in the woods. He didn't trade his Tom Ford suits for flannel and become a carpenter's apprentice. That's not how real change works. He was still CEO of Grant Nexus Technologies, still ran meetings, still reviewed quarterly numbers, still answered to a board that measured success in revenue growth and market share. But his calendar changed. Every Friday afternoon he flew to Vermont, landed at Burlington at 4:30, drove the rental car down, Route 100, arrived at Henry's house before dark. Saturday morning coffee at the kitchen table. Saturday afternoon he stood in the garage while Henry taught him to use a hand plane. Maxwell's palms blistered. His strokes were uneven. The wood came out rough where it should have been smooth. Henry watched, corrected him without words, moved his hands to the right position, and for the first time in 3 years laughed. It was a small laugh, short, almost reluctant, like a muscle that hadn't been used in a long time remembering how to fire. But it was real, and Maxwell heard it like a bell ringing in an empty church. Sundays he drove back, flew to Boston or New York. Monday morning boardroom. The machine continued. But the man inside it had shifted. Not broken, not rebuilt, just shifted. The way a house settles on its foundation after a storm. The Kuroda deal didn't die. Takeshi Kuroda waited 6 weeks. When Maxwell flew to Tokyo and sat across from him in the quiet conference room overlooking the Kyoto skyline, Takeshi asked one question. "Why did you cancel, family?" Maxwell said. Nothing more. Takeshi studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "A man who puts family first is a man I can trust." He signed the contract that afternoon, $2.3 billion. But when Maxwell left the building, he didn't call his VP to celebrate. He called his father. "Deal's done, Dad." Henry's response, "Good. The porch railing still needs sanding. The deal was just a deal. The porch railing was real." Gloria Calloway passed away 7 weeks after Martha arrived in Okinawa, a Tuesday. Early morning. The garden was wet with rain. Martha was holding her mother's hand when it happened. Gloria's breathing slowed, then stopped. Then the room was still. Elijah was asleep in the next room. Captain on the pillow beside him. Martha stayed 3 weeks. 3 weeks of cooking in her mother's kitchen. 3 weeks of Elijah drawing pictures and taping them to Gloria's refrigerator. 3 weeks of Gloria telling stories about Ronald, about the garden, about the day Martha was born, and how she screamed so loud the nurse jumped. 3 weeks that Martha would carry in her chest for the rest of her life like a treasure locked in a vault no one could ever open. She showed up. She arrived in time. She held her mother's hand. 2 months after Gloria's funeral, Maxwell called Martha. Not from his office, from his father's kitchen in Vermont. Henry was in the garage. The sound of the hand plane scraping in the background. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I lost my job," Martha said. Her voice was flat. Factual. The way she always delivered bad news. Like reading a grocery list of disasters. "They gave my position to someone else while I was in Okinawa. My supervisor told me she couldn't guarantee it, and she didn't." Maxwell didn't say, "I'll fix it." He didn't offer money. He didn't swoop in with a solution wrapped in a bow. Because that's not what Martha needed. And that's not who she was. She didn't need saving. She needed a door. Just one door that wasn't locked. "I know someone at Mount Sinai," Maxwell said. "She runs a CNA advancement program. Guaranteed placement after completion. Better pay. Regular hours. Full benefits for you and Elijah. Would you want me to make a call?" Martha was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to do that." "I know. But you showed me something on that flight. The least I can do is show you a door. Walking through it is your choice. A connection, not charity. A key, not a handout. The difference mattered, and Martha knew it. "Okay," she said. "Make the call." 6 months later, Maxwell sat in a conference room at Massachusetts General Hospital. Not for a deal, not for an acquisition. For a presentation about a small program his foundation had quietly launched. The Presence Project. Simple idea, radical in practice. When a patient was diagnosed as terminal and their family couldn't afford to travel, the program covered everything. Flights, hotels, meals, ground transportation. No applications. No income verification. No bureaucratic maze to navigate while your mother or father or child was dying in a hospital bed 1,000 miles away. The budget for year 1 was $2.4 million, a fraction of the Kuroda deal. Pocket change by Billionaire standards. But for each family that received a call saying your flight is booked, your hotel is reserved, just go, just be there, just show up, it wasn't pocket change, it was everything. It was the difference between holding a hand and staring at a phone, between being there and wishing you had been, between I showed up and I should have. Maxwell named the program after no one. Not himself, Not his mother, not Martha, just the Presence Project. Because that's all it was. A way to make sure that when it mattered most, people could be present, could show up, could sit beside someone they loved, and say the things that needed to be said while there was still someone alive to hear them. 1 year later, Martha Calloway graduated from the Mount Sinai CNA Advanced Certification Program on a Thursday in October. Top of her class. Her evaluation read, Exceptional Clinical Judgment, Remarkable Empathy with Patients and Families. Recommended for palliative care placement without reservation. Palliative care. End-of-life support. The department most healthcare workers avoided because it meant watching people die every week. Martha chose it. Not because she was brave, because she understood it. She'd sat beside her mother in Okinawa and learned what dying actually looks like. Not the Hollywood version, the real version, the slow version. The version where you hold someone's hand and tell them stories and make them tea they can barely drink and pretend the afternoon light in the garden is the most interesting thing in the world because you both know the alternative is talking about the thing neither of you wants to name. She was good at it. The patients loved her. The families trusted her. Because Martha didn't flinch at grief. She'd lived inside it. She knew its shape. Her salary went up, not dramatically, but enough for health insurance for 2. Enough for a 1-bedroom apartment in Astoria, small, 5th-floor walk-up. But the window faced south, and every morning the sun came through and landed on the kitchen table like a gift someone left at the door. Elijah had his own bed for the first time. A real bed, not a fold-out, not a couch, not a sleeping bag on someone else's floor. A twin mattress with dinosaur sheets that Martha found on sale at Target for $22. He slept with Captain on one side and a pillow shaped like a cloud on the other. Every night. The same bed. In the same room. In the same apartment that didn't move or change or disappear. He started 1st grade in September. Brought Captain on the first day. His teacher, Miss Rodriguez, let him keep it on his desk. By the 2nd week, Captain lived in his cubby, watching over his backpack like a guard. By the 3rd week, Elijah had friends. 2 boys named Marcus and Deshaun, who also liked dinosaurs. By the 4th week, he was drawing pictures during free time that made Miss Rodriguez pull Martha aside at pickup. Your son has an extraordinary imagination, she said. The detail in his drawings, the stories he tells about them. It's unusual for his age. Martha looked at the pictures. A green dinosaur flying over an ocean. An elephant standing on a cloud. A family of 3 stick figures with circle heads, Martha, Elijah, and above them floating in the sky with wings, a woman labeled in careful 6-year-old letters, Grandma, in the sky. Martha taped every single drawing to the refrigerator. The entire door was covered. Layers of crayon and marker and construction paper overlapping like evidence of a life being built one school day at a time. In Vermont, healing moved at the speed of wood shavings. Henry Grant did not forgive his son quickly. Forgiveness was not in Henry's nature, the way speed was not in the nature of oak. It grew slowly, in rings, 1 layer at a time, invisible from the outside, but accumulating. Maxwell came every Friday, 4-hour drive from Boston, sometimes longer in snow. He didn't fly, he drove, because driving felt like effort, like penance. Like the physical act of crossing distance meant something that a private jet couldn't replicate. They didn't talk much. A carpenter and a CEO don't share vocabulary. Their conversations were short, practical, about the wood, about the weather, about the porch railing that still needed replacing. But sometimes in the middle of sanding a board or measuring a cut, Henry would say something about Eleanor. Not big things, small things. The way she hummed when she washed dishes. The way she always burned the toast on purpose because she liked it that way. The way she read to Maxwell every night until he was 10, and he pretended to be asleep because he didn't want her to stop, but he was too old to admit it. Maxwell listened. He didn't add to the stories. He just received them, like someone being handed pieces of something precious that had been locked away for 3 years. One Friday in November, Henry put down his hand plane. looked at the sawdust on the workbench. Then, at his son. "She'd like this," he said. "You coming up here?" Maxwell's throat tightened. "I know, Dad. Don't stop. I won't." Henry picked up the plane, went back to the wood, and that was it. No embrace, no tears, no declaration. Just 2 words from a 71-year-old carpenter that meant more than any contract Maxwell had ever signed. Don't stop. Keep showing up. Keep coming back. Keep being here. The Presence Project completed its first year with 143 families served, 143 plane tickets, hotel rooms, rental cars, and meals paid for so that someone could be beside someone they loved when the end came. The numbers were small. Maxwell knew that. In the world of philanthropy, 143 was a rounding error. Foundations with real ambition talked in thousands, tens of thousands. Maxwell's board members smiled politely when he mentioned it, the way people smile at something they consider quaint. But Maxwell read the letters. Every month. A stack of handwritten notes from families who'd received the call. Most of them said the same thing, in different words. "I was there. I made it." I held their hand. One letter came from a woman in Arkansas, written on lined notebook paper in blue ink. Her handwriting was careful and uneven, like someone who hadn't written a letter by hand in a long time. "Because of your program, I held my son's hand when he took his last breath. He was 31. Leukemia. I live in Fort Smith. He was at a hospital in Philadelphia. I couldn't afford the flight. Your people called me on a Tuesday. By Wednesday I was on a plane. I sat with him for 9 days. He knew I was there. He squeezed my hand on the last morning. Without your program, I would have been 2,000 miles away, and I would have never forgiven myself." Maxwell read that letter in his office. 47th floor, Manhattan. The same floor where he'd placed a phone face down on a mahogany table 3 years ago. He read it twice. Then he closed the door and cried. In the top drawer of his desk, beside a Mont Blanc pen and a stack of business cards he never used, sat 2 pieces of paper. One was a letter written in pencil by a dying woman in Vermont. The other was a drawing of a green dinosaur with impossible wings flying over an airplane labeled Captain Flies, signed for M.R. Grant from Elijah. 2 letters, one from the dead, one from the living, one from the woman who made him, one from the boy who reminded him what he'd forgotten. Both said the same thing, not in words, in presence. In the act of reaching out across distance and fear and time and saying you matter, you are seen. Show up. A billionaire sat next to a crying single mother on a 14-hour flight. That's how this story started, and everything about that sentence is true. But now you know the full picture, and the full picture changes everything. It wasn't a billionaire sitting next to a single mother. It was a son who lost his mother sitting next to a daughter who was about to lose hers. It wasn't wealth next to poverty. It was grief next to grief. 2 people carrying the same wound, dressed in different clothes, flying in different directions, but bleeding from the same place. What she whispered to her son wasn't a speech. It wasn't a lesson. It wasn't wisdom from a self-help book or a quote from a motivational poster. It was 3 words. We show up. The simplest sentence a mother can say to a frightened child during turbulence. The kind of thing you'd forget by the time the seatbelt sign turned off. But those 3 words landed on a wound that had been open for 3 years. They broke through walls that $9.7 billion had built. They forced a man who could buy anything to confront the one thing he could never purchase back: time, presence. The chance to hold his mother's hand and say, "I'm here. I'm sorry. I love you." Before the bed went cold and the tea went still, and the book on the nightstand stayed forever unfinished at page 147, he thought the 14-hour flight was taking him to the most important meeting of his life. He was right. It just wasn't the meeting he expected. The most important meeting didn't happen in a conference room in Tokyo. It happened in Seat 2A, at 35,000 feet, in the dark, between a man in a Tom Ford suit and a woman in a Target hoodie, between a Patek Philippe watch and a stuffed dinosaur named Captain, between a $2.3 billion deal and a peanut butter sandwich with the crusts cut off. Sometimes the person who changes your life isn't in the boardroom. They're in seat 2B, wearing a clearance hoodie, whispering to a 5-year-old boy about being brave. Thank you for watching. If this story reminded you of someone you need to show up for, take a few seconds to share it with them. Subscribe for more stories like this. See you on the next one. One more thing before you go. This story is fiction. Every character, every name, every event was made up. But the feelings are real. The science is real. The grief is real. And the choice to show up or not, that's the most real thing in this entire video. If you or someone you know is caring for a loved one with a serious illness, you're not alone. The National Alliance for Caregiving and the Caregiver Action Network both offer free resources, support lines, and connections to help you carry the weight. Look them up. Reach out. You don't have to do this by yourself. I wrote this story because I almost made the same mistake Maxwell did. I almost chose work over showing up for someone I love. I got lucky. I changed my mind in time. Not everyone does. And that haunts me. If this story makes even one person pick up the phone tonight and call someone they've been putting off, calling someone they've been meaning to visit, someone they've been too busy or too scared or too proud to show up for, then every word was worth it. Drop a comment and tell me about a time someone showed up for you when it mattered, or a time you wish you had. I read every single one.